All right, hi everybody, welcome in. Thank you for joining the Watershed Scale Coastal Resilience Concept through Delivery Case Study in Delaware's Inland Bays session. My name is Leah Morgan and I'm the Science Fellow at the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary. I'm just going to go over a couple of brief housekeeping announcements before we get started with our session this afternoon. Please reach out via the chat to anyone named Tech Help with any questions, whether they be tech related or otherwise, and we'll be able to help you out there. Please be aware that all of our sessions will be recorded and the chat threads will be saved. The recordings will be available via Sched and YouTube a few weeks after the summit. There will be 2 opportunities for questions during this afternoon's session, depending on time. Each speaker may have a few minutes at the end of their presentations for questions, and these questions will be selected via the Q&A box. So please enter your questions there during the presentations, and we will answer them as time allows. At the end of the session, there will also be an open Q&A session for all speakers. Questions can be directed at either or both of our presenters for this afternoon session. And during this time, we also request that you use the raise hand feature if you're comfortable, and our tech team will ask you to unmute to verbally ask your question. We will also be taking additional questions from the Q&A box during this time. And also a friendly reminder that if you signed up to be a student judge for the summit, the deadline for submitting your evaluations is at 2:00 p.m. this afternoon. So I do encourage you guys to get those submitted if you have not done so already. And I'm going to now throw it over to Jim Eisenhart to introduce himself and our first speaker for this afternoon session. Jim?
Well, thanks, Leah. Welcome, everybody. Right after lunch, last day, just where everybody wanted to be right now. Thanks for participating. This is a full session, and we're fortunate to have our sister National Estuary Program, the Delaware Center for the Inland Bays, doing a session here to talk about their approach to watershed improvements, a holistic approach. And you're going to hear a variety of different topics that have been brought up throughout the summit so far, kind of all condensed into one kind of microcosm example for this. So Marianne Walch, the science director for the Center for Inland Bays, will be leading off the presentation, and Doug Janiec, Natural Resources Program Manager for Sovereign, will be also doing several sessions. So just so everybody knows, this will be one long themed session. This will not be a bunch of different speakers coming in and out like many of the other concurrent sessions. So with that, I didn't want to take too long on the intros. I think most people do know Marianne and Doug, so let's spend more time on the projects. And so Marianne, I think you are first up here for this.
Okay, can you see my PowerPoint?
Sure can.
Okay, great.
How about others?
Okay. Great. So as Jim mentioned, the intention of this session is, the overarching intention is to talk a little bit about a successful comprehensive planning approach that our center has built from lessons that we've learned over the years. And we're going to provide examples of a few of the projects that have been implemented from those plans and how the planning made them successful, or what didn't work well and why that didn't work, and how it got incorporated into future plans. So as Jim mentioned, our center is one of the 2 National Estuary programs in Delaware. Our study area is the southeast corner of the state of Delaware, and we manage 3 small, shallow coastal bays: Rehoboth Bay, Indian River Bay, and Little Asswoman Bay. We accomplish our mission through education, public outreach, policy work, scientific research, and restoration. And restoration's been a big focus of what we've been doing the last few years. We have multiple restoration initiatives, and we also have limited staff and resources. So developing partnerships and very thoughtful planning are key to making those restoration initiatives successful. So planning is an important part of almost everything that we do. The center, like all National Estuary programs, oversees the implementation of a comprehensive conservation and management plan, or CCMP, for the bays and for their watershed. So this is a long-term overarching plan. It's used by the center and its partners to focus efforts to improve water quality in the inland bays and to address the multiple challenges that our bays face. The CCMP provides basically the broader objectives and actions for what we do. So some of the actions are things like establish a living shoreline initiative and create demonstration projects, or retrofit 4,500 acres with stormwater BMPs. So the big question for us is, okay, how do we identify and prioritize projects to meet those goals? In the past, we've relied more heavily on an opportunistic approach to selecting and implementing projects versus a planned approach. But we're moving more and more toward focusing in on that planned approach. So for all of our initiatives, we're developing master plans that have many or most of the components that you see here. So we involve key partners, key stakeholders, and we include them in all of the processes of the project. So planning, implementation of the project, seeking and providing funding. We try to include data-driven processes in our selection of projects and in our planning efforts. We assess the needs for the area and for the goals that we're trying to meet. And sometimes that's multiple drivers that we use to develop these projects. And sometimes our partners may have different drivers than we do as an NEP. And then we use a data-driven process, hopefully, to select and prioritize those projects, looking at cost-benefit analyses and things like that, environmental benefits, multi-tiered screenings, and it's an iterative approach. And we finalize then a few selected projects that we know we want to implement, and then we include in that document a grant application level concept design, sometimes a permit level design, all the background information and data that we need to create and submit permits for the projects. And we try as best possible to get commitment right up front from our partners and our landowners for the project. And in these plans, we also enumerate all of the outcomes of the project, the nutrient load reductions and other environmental benefits and so forth. Again, that makes it easier, that makes it easier to submit grant applications and the cost estimates as well. We can just lift all of that directly out of the plan and plop it right into a grant application. So these are a few of the plans that we've had pretty good success with over the last few years. Our time is pretty limited in this session, so I definitely can't go into any great detail on these plans. The goals of almost all of these plans are to focus on green infrastructure approaches to restoration. And I'm just going to go through a few of these plans very briefly. Again, no great detail, but just try to pick out some of the things that worked well and in some cases what didn't work as well and what we did to correct that. So the earliest example of this successful planning approach that we've used recently is a stormwater retrofit plan for the Anchorage Canal drainage area in the that's along the coastal highway just south of Bethany Beach. So this drainage area encompasses 4 small communities: Bethany, Sea Colony Resort, Middlesex Beach, and the town of South Bethany. And this drainage area is over 100 acres, and all of the stormwater runoff, mostly from impervious area, the highway and development, ends up in this one northernmost canal. And the town of South Bethany is a small town that's built almost entirely on man-made poorly fleshed canals, and they have extreme water quality issues in these canals, have had for years. The only BMP when we started this initiative that was treating all of that 100 acres of runoff was a very small sediment basin right at the head of this canal. It was totally inadequate. So all of these towns and other partners, the Center for the Inland Bays, DELDOT, Center for Watershed Protection, and engineering consultants work together to develop a master watershed plan for this drainage area. So this plan included concept designs, cost estimates, nutrient load reductions, and so forth for a variety of different projects all along the highway and within the community in that drainage area. And it included things like wet swales along the sides of the highways, infiltration basins in some of the parking areas, bioretention facilities and the medians and along some of the other right-of-way areas. And we started implementing this plan with our partners in 2011. The plan was completed in 2010, and we started applying for grants right away to do the project. And from the period, in the period 2011 through just this year, 2020, we have managed to implement all of these projects. So this was really our first great success in doing this planning and it was successful because we had proposal ready projects that could easily be peeled out of the document and put into funding application. And we could easily peel out portions of the project that fit the funding level that we were applying for. DelDOT was a really important partner in all of this, not only in developing the plan, but definitely in implementing the projects along the state right of way. So this is the very last project in this plan that we just completed this past summer. DelDOT actually was responsible for the construction of this combined stormwater pond and stormwater wetland. It was all in state right of way. And the great partnerships and the long-term commitment of these partnerships through the 10 to 12 years of this whole initiative was really key. This has provided a model for future plans that we developed and are now implementing. The next plan I wanted to talk very briefly about is the Living Shoreline Siting and Concept Plan. This was done with Doug Janiec, Sovereign Consulting. And not going to go into detail here, but our goal was to select 6 living shoreline demonstration project sites. And we used a multi-tiered geospatial screening that Doug developed, had a lot of stakeholder input. We did field visits to some of the top candidate sites. And then Doug helped us develop conceptual plans with cost estimates for 6 sites. One of the lessons we learned here is that we really had to get upfront commitment from our private landowners. Some of these projects that we planned have not come to fruition because we didn't get that commitment right away. And it's always been a sticking point with projects on private land, but we really learned our lesson in this one. Next one was a stormwater master plan for the town of Dewey Beach. It's a highly vulnerable area in our watershed, very low-lying barrier island. It has a lot of problems with flooding and shoreline erosion. So we helped the town develop a green infrastructure stormwater master plan that identified over 40 BMPs that were prioritized, and these included not only stormwater BMPs, but also living shoreline projects. And again, we had concept designs, cost estimates, and environmental benefits laid out, and we had great commitment from the town on this. This was also integrated with a planning exercise that DelDOT had grant funding for, and RK&K and Sovereign participated in this. So this helped facilitate the implementation of some of the projects in that master plan. I'm going to talk about this one more in my next talk, so I'm not going to spend any time on it here. This was a watershed reforestation plan that we did. I'll say more about that in a bit. And then the last one that I wanted to mention is a shellfish enhancement plan that we've done for the inland bays. So we have very low densities of wild oyster populations in our bays, although natural recruitment does seem to be increasing recently. And we have a burgeoning aquaculture industry now, just in the beginning phases. But recognizing the ecological benefits of a healthy oyster population, our goal is to increase the wild native oysters in the inland bays and provide sustainable reefs and so forth for them. So we've done this in 2 phases. The first phase did a geospatial suitability model for oyster restoration that combined a number of physical and biological and regulatory factors to assess the suitability of all of the areas within the bays for oyster reef projects. And then we started to implement some pilot projects, very small reefs that we could monitor and do research on to see what worked well, what kinds of tactics worked best in our bays, what kinds of issues we would run up against. And to date, we've implemented already 3 pilot subtidal reefs, and we are currently designing and getting ready to implement some intertidal reefs as well. So one of the lessons we learned here is that although we try to do science-driven planning approaches, sometimes our planning isn't just about science, because there are lots of user conflict issues, regulatory issues, and so forth that have gone into this plan that we really have to address in future phases of the planning. And continual communication, not just in the planning effort, but also about the results of some of our studies and so forth, has been really key to moving this process along. These are some plans that we're currently using our lessons learned to develop at the moment. Not going to discuss these in any detail, but we definitely have a great process that we've developed for doing these planning exercises, much more efficient now. So these are the basic lessons learned. Use good science. Having the science really helps us counter a lot of the misperceptions and objections that we sometimes encounter in doing these planning efforts. We have to consider the people factor in all of this, because people are an important part of all of these plans, particularly in the implementation, and they may have different drivers than we have. Communicate early and often throughout the entire process, and a really critical, get landowner partner commitments right at the beginning of the process if at all possible. So things like permissions to do projects, commitments of funding, commitments to maintain projects once they're completed, and develop MOAs as early in the process as you can, because especially with small towns and homeowner associations, there's a lot of frequent turnover, and you may not be dealing with the same people 2 years from now that you started with. Including projects with different costs helps us tailor the projects with different grant opportunities. And start with the low-hanging fruit. Some projects are going to be much easier to implement than others, so go ahead and start implementing those. Demonstrate how this can be successful. And when people see the success, then they're more likely to fund and support future projects. And the last bullet I have there is be flexible. And that's a lesson that we've truly learned. We're always learning and always having to change our approaches. That's it.
So folks, if we could, Marianne, right on time, well done. But since you're going into the next one, if it's okay, why don't we hold all the questions till Marianne, you go through your second presentation. And so folks, while Marianne's doing that, the way this was structured was to start looking at the big picture for all these different plans. It's a pretty robust program, I think you can all see, of how going from a comprehensive conservation management plan to sub-discipline / sub-resource or / sub-geography plans has really benefited here, and how to take this big, almost overwhelming set of goals and objectives and bring them into finite things, how that became very effective. So now Marianne and Doug are going to walk through some case studies, implementation elements coming out of those plans, so that I think we all like to see things happen and not just plans sitting on a shelf. And so we wanted to focus a little bit more on that. So Marianne, that's up and ready to go?
Okay, great.
Then we'll do a couple of questions at the end of this, if there are any, before going on to Doug, if that makes sense. Okay.
Okay, so in my previous presentation, I mentioned a watershed reforestation plan that we developed, and I didn't go into any detail about that. This is, I'm going to give a brief overview of what that plan was, and then just discuss one of the successful projects that we just recently implemented. Actually, we're still in the process of implementing. So this project that I'm going to talk about, as I said, is from a reforestation planning effort that we conducted in 2017, I believe. So the driver behind this is, of course, how we use the land directly affects the water quality in our bays, because various land uses produce different types and different amounts of pollutants. In our watershed, agriculture, shown in the yellow areas here, is definitely the largest land use, although it is shrinking. And so it's a major source of pollution to our bays. So our last State of the Bays report, which was issued in 2016, we're currently updating that. We have a new report coming out in the fall, but I don't have the most recent data. So this is data from the 2016 report, and it showed that in the years between 2007 and 2012, developed lands in our watershed developed lands increased by 34 square miles. And our agricultural land was down by over 18 square miles. And also our upland forests were down by 14 square miles. And so the trend in our watershed is more development and loss of forests and critical wildlife habitat. And all indicators are that this trend is continuing and will continue. So another issue that we deal with in our watershed is lack of protection and restoration efforts to counter these losses. The natural habitats, of course, support a diversity of plants and animals, and some of them are rare or becoming scarce. And these habitats are being rapidly lost or fragmented due to changes in land use in the watershed. So we did an assessment of protection and restoration in the watershed, and found that progress on protection of natural areas has nearly stalled and slowed. And almost all of the progress that was made was before 2010. This is largely due to reductions in funding for public conservation efforts. And our watershed development is really driving the land values sky high. So purchasing land for easements and so forth has become difficult. Of course, buffers of natural vegetation can intercept and remove pollutants, and they vary in effectiveness with width and type of vegetation. So we did an assessment for the last State of the Bays report of the width of buffers, forested buffers between agricultural land and our waterways. And we definitely have seen a decline over the years. So these are buffers that are 50 feet or more in width. So that is an issue. And wildlife habitat, the fragmentation and loss of habitat for key wildlife species is also a key issue for us. So reforestation has become a major initiative for the Center for the Inland Bays. And we're working with a variety of partners on acquisition of land, on easements on land to do various types of restoration projects. But we're really focusing on reforestation. So these are some of our priorities: to protect habitat, restore habitat, to expand forested buffers to deal with pollution going into the bays, ultimately to improve water quality, and to connect fragmented habitats and develop more interior forest. So we did this watershed reforestation planning as a geospatial exercise and then outreach to landowners. So reforestation as a green infrastructure practice is actually one of the most cost-effective strategies to achieve nutrient load reductions, especially on agricultural lands, because converting cropland to a green infrastructure practice, such as reforestation or wetlands, results in the highest nutrient reductions for the cost in the long term. You're taking things out of fertilization and then you're replacing them with natural vegetation. So we partnered with the Sussex Conservation District to identify and conceptualize projects that provide water quality benefits and improve wildlife habitat. So we had a geospatial model that used multiple environmental parameters to rank all agricultural parcels within the watershed. that were greater than 10 acres in size. And then once we had these priorities established, we did outreach with the district to public and private landowners. And we identified 10 parcels that we had some agreement on top priority and commitments from landowners. And we developed concept plans for the planting and enumerated the outcomes, the nutrient reductions, carbon sequestration, and so forth. And we began working with partners to implement it. And as of now, we have implemented 7 of the 10 sites in the plan, either completed the implementation or have it scheduled. So I'm going to skip over this because I think it's a little bit of a repeat of the next slide. So I wanted to switch to talking about this one specific project, Burbage Road. This is a county-owned parcel, and it has over the years been leased for agriculture. But the county agreed in 2018 to take the parcel out of production and to make it available for reforestation. And the county's been a great partner in this reforestation effort. We've done projects on several county-owned parcels. They're making more parcels available to us. We're going to be working with them to reforest most of the 400-acre Wolf Neck wastewater treatment plant to turn that from agricultural spray irrigation to silviculture. And the county's interest is partly in developing a nutrient credit banking system with the state. So they get additional benefit from this. So the Burbage Road project is a 20-acre parcel. It drains directly to the Indian River Bay via I think Vines Creek. Let's see. Okay, so here's a picture of some of the project after it was implemented. As I said, Sussex County owns the project. The Conservation District helped with a lot of the earthwork that was involved, and environmental concern has helped us with some wetland design. So the objectives of the project were to take those 20 acres out of production, and there was a large drainage ditch going right through the center of the project that we decided would make a great wetland restoration. So the Sussex Conservation District helped design that and do the construction of it. So that was converted to a 1.8 acre treatment wetland. And then 7 acres of the property were planted in 3,000 native trees. So here's an aerial view of it. This is the drainage ditch that went through the parcel. And the wetlands were created back here next to the woods and along the drainage area. And then much of the rest of it was planned for reforestation. And all of it drains to this ditch here on the right-hand side. So this was the final design of the wetland creation that was done by the Conservation District. So the drainage ditch was converted to a wetland with complex habitat in it. There's a water control structure here. Excuse me. And there was another wetland in the back area of the project as well. And then these other ovals are berms that were created to add topography to the parcel using material that was removed from the wetland areas. And here's a drone shot of what the wetland looked like right after the district had done the grading and moved the earth. You can see the berms that were created here. Another shot of it, and you can see the other wetland next to the woods here. This was an old landfill site originally. And you see the drainage ditch here. Okay. One of the issues that we had with this was that there was a fairly large infestation with Phragmites in the entire drainage ditch that went through this property. So even though we were able to construct the treatment wetland, we felt like we weren't going to be successful in planting it until we had that frag under control. So we spent 2 seasons heavily controlling the Phragmites there, and we finally feel that we have it under control sufficiently to do the wetland planting. So that planting is actually going to occur this spring. We're going to be trying to engage volunteers if COVID allows us to do the planting. And then we were able to go in after the wetland was constructed and plant the trees. So this was done with a contractor, and it was a mix of native species, both hardwoods and mostly hardwoods, oaks and so forth, a few evergreen trees. And then we'll be putting native wetland vegetation in the wet areas. And these berms have been planted with pollinator seed mixes as well, native ones.
Marianne, about 2 minutes.
Okay, I'm almost done. So a key component of this project and all of our reforestation projects is monitoring and maintenance. We feel it's key to assess the success of each one of these projects because it has an impact on future planning. We have some big issues in our watershed with deer browse. We've had a couple of projects that were largely unsuccessful because almost all of the trees were eaten by deer fairly quickly. And we're trying to test various approaches to minimizing that deer browse and accommodating for it. We want to know which species of trees survive best. What percent survival do we get on typical projects? How can we improve that? And what is the long-term biodiversity that we create? How successful are we not only in the first few years, but also 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now? And we're actually developing a citizen science program right now. This spring will be the first pilot of it. We're going to train people to identify some of the tree seedlings that were planted on the project and to help us do the monitoring and provide the data. Should be a very cost-effective way of gathering this information. Okay, so that was very quick, and I apologize for the rapid journey through that, but I'm very happy to answer any questions about either of those presentations.
Emily, do we have any questions in the chat that we could deal with now? I know at the end, we're going to try to do a broader Q&A with the whole panel, but anything right now?
So it doesn't look like anything's come in the Q&A box just now, but I think we can, since we're right at the 2 o'clock mark, we can jump into the next talk and then hit the Q&A at the end.
Thanks. Well done, Marianne. Doug?
Okay, let me share.
We'll load up yours.
I'm loading.
Okay, so now we're gonna have a couple more cool case studies.
First one.
Get your popcorn, get your favorite beverage, and here we go.
Demonstration, Living Shoreline project in the Delaware, Botanic Gardens, and Pepper Creek. And with our great primary partners.
Doug, we're not seeing your screen.
All right, hold on.
Gardens and Pepper Creek.
Escape. Let me stop real quick here. I was wondering if it would happen this way. Give me 1 moment. And I will get back into that. Okay, so you see a black screen right now? Is that working for you? I'll start it.
Nope, still see your smiling face.
Crapola. Okay, let me fix that then.
It's all right. This one's not 15 minutes. You're all right.
Yeah, I just gotta get it right the first time here. And we're going to share that screen. You see my face now?
Yep, see you.
All right, let's see if it should be on screen too here. See if this works. Yes, no?
This is a
We hear it.
demonstration, Living Shoreline project.
Right, let's
in
go.
Delaware.
Hold on. I think I gotta have it on the screen before I can share before I share.
Yeah, I think so because you're.
Yeah, because it's
We can, yep. We saw it for a second there, Doug, and then it jumped away.
right. So I'm gonna share it. I'm gonna get it up first. Stop, pause it, and then. Sorry for this little fusion here. Stop that. Then I share. Bam.
There.
Okay. It's good.
Yep, there you go.
Yep, we see.
Oh,
Shoreline
there you go.
project in Delaware, Botanic Gardens, and Pepper Creek. And with our great primary partners, Delaware Center for Inland Bays, and the Delaware Botanic Gardens and Pepper Creek. The project is located along the north shore of the tidal Pepper Creek, a tributary of the Indian River Bay. The Botanic Gardens can be broken up into 3 ecozones. The first zone being an open meadow area that includes a manicured native plant garden, a sloped forested area, and a shoreline. As you can see, this is a unique destination filled with a lot of character, including features such as 7 to 10 foot wide bird nests that are made from waste material during a path clearing. The purpose of the project is to provide a nature-based conventional living shoreline demonstration project which provides protection to the shoreline, provides significant water quality and ecological uplift, utilizes material from the property to the greatest extent possible, and is designed to reflect the personality of the gardens. This project addressed nearly 500 linear feet along the shoreline of the project site. The project had 4 phases, i.e. main components. The first phase was anchored branch tow. The second phase was low marsh rejuvenation and wetland pollinator growth. The third phase was low marsh rejuvenation and repairing understory establishment. And the fourth phase was more low marsh rejuvenation. The first phase was the anchored branch tow. It was made exclusively from waste materials from the site. The brown line you see showing up on this diagram represents the approximate location of the tow. The anchor branch tow is made up of anchor sets spaced 5 feet apart. Each anchor set is made up of 2 jetted in pieces of timber that are bolted together. Each timber is jetted in 3.5 to 4 feet. The exposed portion of the timber is only going to be between 18 and 20 inches. We first installed the vertical portions of each set, and we linked them together with bolts with cross timbers. We then install the slanted portions of the sets, and in doing so, we're trapping the cross branches into the anchor system. Little chainsaw work and cleanup, and that's what a completed section looks like. Also note, all these pictures are taken at or near low tide. During high tide, illness, this entire structure is underwater. This section is nearly completed, but the idea is that the existing marsh will go into this, and this wooded area will be part of the marsh edge. Any areas not vegetated landward of this tow will be planted and revegetated. Phase 2 involves a low marsh rejuvenation and a wetland pollinator grove. Low marsh rejuvenation is primarily a little bit of lighting activity by trimming some branches and also some planting of plugs of low marsh species. The wetland pollinator grove provides a unique component to the project. Not only does it have your typical shrubs or herbaceous species which are selected to be pollinator friendly, it also has a stand of inverted root wads. These root wads will be populated with vines in the spring. They'll provide nesting sites, perching sites, and a unique habitat for the wildlife. Phase 3 will involve a low marsh rejuvenation effort and a repairing understory establishment. It's actually a reestablishment. The low marsh rejuvenation effort here involves selective pruning to lighten the site and to plant barren areas. Even Brian's getting his hands dirty on this one. The repairing understory establishment first involves creating revetment in the style of the bird nest to hold back some soil that will be planted with vegetation. this photograph, you'll see the revetment that's been constructed. You'll see the backfill up to the top of the revetment, and there's a little bit of sand on top there. It's mostly topsoil. You'll see the plantings of low marsh on the right side of the revetment, and then around the edge there, you see a bunch of vines that are packed between the soil and the revetment itself. And these are basically mattresses of briar that was cleared during the past, and we're using this instead of filter fabric. This drone photography shows the phase 3 area pretty much done. The only thing that hasn't happened yet is in the backfill area, there's going to be shrubs and some grass species planted. But other than that, it's pretty much done, and it's a pretty attractive feature both on the ground and from the air. Phase 4 is a low marsh rejuvenation. It's a little bit different from the other marsh work we've done on the other parts of the site because it's had a little more scour at this part. It's a little more exposed to some energy. So we have to do a little extra steps here. As you can see in this photograph, portions of the peat layer is being scoured away. What our goal is here is to raise the elevation to its level with that peat level, which is where the marsh wants to grow. Then we'll do the traditional planting on top of that. So here's what it looks like after it's done. You notice we have some fall plantings going in there, and that's the same with the whole site. But the intent is also to do supplemental spring plantings. We're trying to get a jump on things a little bit. And also in the background, you notice we have another inverted root wad just there to balance out the site. We have a couple others in this area as well. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention all the volunteer support we have in this project. Huge amounts of the project was put in by volunteers. And they worked very hard for a number of weeks to make this all happen. And I'd just like to thank them at this point in the talk. Part of the garden's mission is outreach education. As part of the project, we incorporated a viewing platform. This is a picture of it under construction. The platform allows you to see along the woods edge, the marsh edge, as well as the creek. This series of photos show the platform during and after construction. Thanks a lot for your time, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation.
Thanks, Doug. On time and a little early.
Yeah, getting caught up.
You want to set up the other one for a minute here?
Sure.
I do note, Emily, I think there's a question for Marianne in the chat to respond to.
Yeah, we did have one come in for Marianne. Since we have a few minutes, we can go ahead and pose this question. So
Yeah, sure.
have any private agricultural landowners been involved in reforestation efforts yet? If so, what outreach strategies seem to work best with private agriculture landowners?
Yeah, that's a great question. To date, pretty much all of our successful reforestation efforts have been on public land, on state-owned land or county-owned land. We have been in some discussions with at least one a farmer about a potential project, and there is some hope that we might be able to work with her in the future. But the outreach on the original plan was left to the conservation district to do, and the approach was more just sort of a voluntary thing, put the word out there that we want to do these projects, and come to information sessions about it and so forth. And we had very little voluntary participation, almost none. So we're currently working with the district to develop a coastal wetland migration plan that's going to be delineating areas in not just the inland bays, but it's actually a statewide project. But it will delineate areas of agricultural land that are adjacent to tidal wetlands and have certain elevation characteristics and so forth that will make them very marginal or impossible for farming once sea level rise impacts them. So we're going to revise our strategy a little bit and see if we can get more success in working with some of the landowners to do projects and provide easements on those lands. And I think that that will likely be more successful because the focus will be on marginal areas, areas that are marginal for farming success. And there might be more willingness to participate rather than giving over large parcels for tree planting.
Thank you. Hey, Doug, I just have a question for the group. Are you able to make your playlist available to everybody?
Well, yeah, these will be available to the conference.
No, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry.
It's Ben sound. It's all Ben sound. It's Ben sound. So it's all user-free software you off the internet.
All right, we'll let you get started on the second one here.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Watch.
Great. The nice thing about this project is that it was put in about 2 years ago. So we have 2 years of monitoring. So there's a lot of good before and after shots. And that's really the proof of the pudding. So I'll just let this go now.
Seagrass Plantation, a model hybrid living shoreline. You'll see the construction and benefit of a marsh enhancement by retrofitting a breached sluice. You'll see 2 innovative nearshore reefs created to allow the shoreline to passively restore itself. You'll see community volunteering and outreach. And sort of business photos from 2020. Back in 1963, this site was pretty much undeveloped. Just a little bit of marsh management. Today, it's almost completely developed, and shoreline is impacted because of it. Project can be divided in 2 main areas. The primary area, or the beach area we're calling it, had a breached sluice, degraded beach, some back marsh that was impacted as well. Second area was primarily marsh with a stretch of beach, a community dock, and some out parcels. Nor'easter storm directions play a big factor on this beach. As you can see, some part of the beach is directly hit, where other parts have some protection from the sluice, where you have overwash and diffraction. This divides the erosion zone into 2 areas, a moderate erosion zone on one side, and then where direct impact is, you have a much higher rate of erosion. The impact on the beach is clearly visible in this photograph. It also tells us where to focus some of our work. We also get a lot of erosion from the storms coming out of the northwest. These aren't as severe, but they're chronic in the fall and winter, and they can cause a great deal of damage. And you can see in the shoreline all the toe cutting on the marshes from these storms, and also on ground, there's a lot of undercut. The sluice in this pictures were originally installed by the State Fish and Wildlife to try to maintain the marsh. Over the years, it was not maintained, it was abandoned, and the sluice actually started to clog. Back pressure from the marsh actually created the sluice to breach. The breach created a new channel coming out of the marsh that was running almost parallel to the beach and creating a massive amount of scarring in a short amount of time. This figure depicts the existing channel pathway. As you can see, it's running parallel to the shoreline, creating a lot of scour. The yellow line shows the preferred pathway. This allows energy to go directly in the bay and away from the shoreline. To achieve this, stabilize the breach, direct channel flow away from the shoreline, convert the breach into a permanent marsh connection, establish horizontal and vertical controls at that connection to allow for proper marsh flushing. Another component of this is the portion of the sluice that is along the beach also is a safety hazard. It has to drop, and since children come on the beach, we wanted to eliminate that hazard. So we fully abandoned that part of the sluice by filling it in and planting it. Following slides will show this process of the sluice abandonment as well as the correction of the breached area along the beach. The next section of beach was a portion that was being highly eroded by direct exposure to nor'easters. The solution here was to keep the energy off the beach. The best way to do that was to create a nearshore reef that would dampen the wave before it hits the beach. Following slides show you the process that went into creating that nearshore reef. Next part of the project was another nearshore reef. However, this one was made of oyster shellbag and oyster castles. It was a double array design to protect the beach. If you look at the diagram where the arrow is pointing, you see the actual configuration of the reef. The large green bar next to that shows the extent of beach improvement that occurred as a result of that structure. Photographs of the next slide are going to show the process of creating that reef, including some innovative anchoring systems, but also it's going to show you what the final result was and how incredibly different it looks after this reef was installed 2 years later. Next part of the project I'd like to talk about was the marsh shellbag toe that was created. It's went over many hundreds of feet along the marsh. It took up approximately 2,700 to 2,800 shellbag. And these pictures here show you the before and after of the point of the marsh. The bottom right portion of this photo shows all the scouring and the undercut. The undercut was as much as 3, 4 to 5 feet in some cases. These stakes were originally staked this out in the spring. By the time we got back in the fall, that marsh had degraded back about 2 feet. These arrows now show where the shellbags are at the same locations, where we actually filled that gap up with shellbag to create the toe. Top left shows the toe at low tide. As tide's coming in, the wave used to break where the first green arrow was. But where the moving arrow is where the new toe is. What that does is make the wave break farther back toward the bay, allowing for accretion to go in the bottom left, and also allow for low dune formation to occur, and for vegetation to reestablish and actually start expanding again. No words are necessary for this part of the project, just see the pictures. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I hope you appreciate
Doug's going to have to leave very shortly. So I'd like Emily, if we could, are there any questions for Doug before he has to head out? And then we can save questions for Marianne on the back end after her last presentation. Did you see anything?
Sure. So nothing has come into the Q&A box just yet. So if folks have any questions, feel free to type it in there and stick those submitted to us. And again, if people have verbal questions, they can also raise their hand. And we can put up the mic.
While Marianne's loading up her presentation, Doug was ahead of schedule as always. So give her a minute while we're seeing if anybody had anything for Doug. Again, knowing these projects, Doug and Marianne have both done a great job at presenting images and information on these projects to tell the story. That's one thing about working with the center, that they are very conscious about documentation of pre and post conditions and construction techniques because of the focus on education and making sure all that information is captured to share, which is for practitioners, it's a joy to work through that because often you don't have that kind of information. And hopefully you saw in all three of those presentations just how important that kind of data and that kind of imagery is as we're trying to push these kinds of restoration practices throughout the state and this watershed. Anything else come up, Emily? I tried to buy you a minute.
So we do actually have one question that came in for Marianne, so we can address that one right now.
Okay.
And this is related to the CCMP. So folks at PD will be interested to hear your thoughts on this too. Does your CCMP include quantifiable goals and metrics that you use to identify what your plan's focused on? Are you tracking whether your projects are meeting individual plan goals or overall CCMP goals and metrics?
Well, the answer to both of those is yes. We're actually completing a revision of our CCMP. It's been sent to EPA for final approval and then will be signed by our signatories, hopefully in the very near future. So both our current CCMP and the new revised one have very specific metrics for success. Performance measures. And we, in recent years, have been doing a much more targeted effort at tracking those metrics and assessing where we are with the implementation. And I think with this revision, we have done a much better job of developing those performance measures so that they're really quantitative and it's easily seen whether or not we're meeting those goals.
Were there any others, Emily?
That's the only one that's come in so far. So I think that's it for now.
Well, great. Doug, thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah, good luck. Give my best. Yeah. Give my best.
Yeah. So I want to thank Doug too. He's been a partner on a number of these projects, including the one that I'm just going to be talking about. And it's been a real pleasure working with him on a lot of innovative designs for shoreline stabilization.
I'm not leaving. I'm not going anywhere. I just have to leave right now.
No, well, I wanted to thank you before you did leave.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Good. Well,
Okay.
hey, we're right on time, as you guys always are. So, Marianne, I'll let you get started.
Okay, sure. So this last presentation is about a particular project that was identified actually as a site in 3 different planning efforts that we went through. And My co-authors on this one are Bob Collins from the center, who was the project manager on a good portion of this for the center, and Larry Trout, who was the engineer who designed much of the project, and Doug Janiec from Sovereign. I should have listed him here too. He was also an integral partner because this did include a living shoreline component. And Larry Trout has just in the last few weeks left RK&K. He's now with Strawn Environmental. He couldn't be here today. Okay, so this was an area that was identified in the Dewey Beach Stormwater Master Plan that I spoke about earlier in the session. Reed Avenue is located here where it's colored yellow. It is one of the largest drainage areas in this highly vulnerable town. Over 30 acres of almost entirely impervious surface drain from the coastal highway and the neighboring streets around Reed Avenue, and all of that runoff flows to one outfall here on Rehoboth Bay along the shoreline at the bayside end of Reed Avenue. So the green infrastructure plan that was developed for the entire town included a number of different practices, bioretention, pavement removal, infiltration, and also living shorelines. Flooding is really the big driver in the town. It's becoming more and more of a problem, but shoreline erosion is also occurring at a rapid rate. And as you can see, most of the shoreline along the bay has been hardened already. So this is an aerial view of Reed Avenue, the bayside end of it. And this was the project site for the living shoreline. We did do a bioretention cell at the other end of Reed Avenue, and I'm not going to talk about that today because of time limitations. But we're slowly trying to implement a number of the different BMPs because one will not solve all of the problems. So this is Monagle Park. It is town-owned shoreline. It's a public park area, and people like to access the bay here, have picnics, watch the sunset, and so forth. But 30 acres, over 30 acres of impervious surface drain down Reed Avenue and through the drainage system to one outfall here. This is a view of the area before any work was done. So all of the stormwater infrastructure along Reed Avenue and in most of town actually is quite old. It's like a half-century old, greatly undersized for the amount of development that's there currently. And there's a huge problem with surcharging of the drainage pipes from the bays during high tide. So you actually see water coming up out of the inlet and flooding the street. And so flooding is a huge driver for the residents and the town. So this is Reed Avenue looking toward the bay. This is after a typical large rainstorm. So nuisance flooding is chronic. It's a huge issue for the people that live on the street. They sometimes during bigger storms can't access their houses. Let's see. So here's another view of Monagle Park looking out over the bay during a nor'easter. So you can see that the town has tried to do some stopgap measures on their own, dumping sandbags and so forth to try to keep some of the water at least out of the streets, not very successfully. And all of that flooding and wave and wind impacts resulted in a lot of erosion of the shoreline, despite the riprap that was out there to try to protect it. And in fact, the configuration of the riprap in some areas increased the amount of erosion that was occurring. So we were able to obtain funding from a variety of sources and partnerships from a variety of different entities, including the Delaware Department of Transportation, the town. We got grant funding from some state water quality grants. And working with all of those partners, RK&K and Sovereign Consulting developed a design that was an integration of both living shoreline practices and stormwater drainage practices. So some of the components of it, this is the bay area here on the left, and then the street going up toward the coastal highway toward the right. And here's the shoreline. So it included reconfiguration of the existing riprap jetty and revetment there to close the existing gap and reconfigure it with oyster shells and other materials to provide a nature-based retrofit that was more environmentally friendly and more protective of the area. And then there was sand backfill put into the area behind that riprap toe. And there were wetland plantings installed, a low marsh, high marsh, and dune planting. An offshore reef, oyster shell reef, was established in the lower part here in a kind of innovative braided design that was designed to attenuate wave energy coming from the southwest. New outfall pipes were installed from the drainage system and the outlet here at the bay. And we installed tide gates in those new pipes to help prevent some of the tidal surcharge into the drainage system. And then finally, a stabilized kayak launch was included in the project so that the residents and visitors to the town could continue to access the bay without impacting shoreline erosion. So I'm basically going to show you a bunch of slides showing the progress of the construction and what these different components look like. One of the first things that went into the project was the offshore oyster reef. And this is a drone image of it showing the braided configuration of the oyster shell bag. I think the reef was something on the order of 2.5, 3 feet high. It was stabilized by some oyster castles and very firmly anchored to the bottom of the bay using duckbill anchors. So this was protecting from wave and wind energy that came around the end of the pier here on the left. And here's another image showing the location of it. So this pier provides some protection from fetch, but this helps provide additional protection for this area here. Okay, so there was a lot of heavy construction in this project because of its nature of moving big rocks around and installing stormwater infrastructure. So this is a photo of some of the beginning stages where the rocks are being reconfigured and some of the sand backfill is being brought in. You can see here some of the sand backfill being spread behind the new rock toe that was established for the living shoreline. And this is an aerial view of what the project area looked like after the rocks had been reconfigured. So there was a pre-existing gap here. The rocks used to come up here, and from this side around, around here, there was a big gap that was causing erosion. So those rocks were lowered and redistributed to form a more conventional living shoreline toe. And then you see the sand backfill there. And that rock toe was also configured with oyster shell bags to provide additional complex habitat and a little bit more of a nature-based retrofit. The next component of the project was the replacement of some of the stormwater pipes and outfall structures that were there. This is the old pipes after they were pulled out. You can see that they were not in great shape. They were on the order of 50 or 60 years old, and there was they were just basically not nearly functional for the amount of runoff that they were handling. So we ended up putting in an entirely new outfall pipes that you can see in the back here, much larger pipes. One pipe was replaced with 3, and all of those pipes were fitted with tide gates to help, which are basically one-way the check valves. They help prevent bay water from coming up into the drainage system during high tide periods. And here's a view of the new outfall structures after the installation was completed. And then this was a really interesting and innovative portion of the project. This was an idea that was conceived by Larry and Doug to, we knew that we wanted to establish a low dune to help prevent some of the flooding during high tide periods and storms. But we needed a way to stabilize the spine of that dune so that when we get big storm impacts, even if the sand washes away, at least the flood barrier structure is still there and it can be restored very easily. So they came up with the idea of using these things called HESCO flood barriers. And if you're not familiar with them, they're basically four-sided boxes that have wire stabilization on the sides, a heavy-duty fabric inside, and then you can fill them with soil and then plant them on top if you want to. I understand they're used often by the military to have fast construction of structure in desert situations. And they've also been used like after hurricanes to help prevent some flooding or deal with flooding issues. So we included these, a line of these HESCO flood barriers as the spine of a 3.5-foot high dune. And then sand was put inside of them and over top of them, and then dune grasses were planted on top. So here's another view after the dune was completed. You can see it along the back side here, and the new living shoreline area, the new tide gates, and then the oyster reef is in here. So the next step was to plant the wetland plants and dune plants into the project. And we had intended this to be a big volunteer project, but because of the pandemic, we had to cancel that. And we ended up planting the entire thing with Bob Collins, the project manager, and his daughter. So they had a very heavy duty work session out there, but they did a fantastic job. And the last part to be put in was the stabilized kayak launch. It's stabilized with a GSL material that's filled with stone and sand. And then we had the town put up snow fencing to delineate walkway areas so that people, when they're trying to access the bay, would follow those paths and not trample on any of the new vegetation. The grasses grew extremely well. This project was completed in April or May of this past year. So this is midsummer. The dune and Spartina grasses grew up very rapidly and stabilized the whole area very quickly and successfully. So the outcomes of this entire project, we restored 1,750 square feet of tidal wetlands, provided a lot of great habitat there for birds and terrapins and horseshoe crabs and so forth. We estimate that we're going to get annual nutrient load reductions of 15 pounds of nitrogen, 9 pounds of phosphorus from the project. This has very successfully reduced flooding on Reed Avenue. We do have the residents there monitor it and report to us what happens during storms, and they are extraordinarily pleased with what's happening. During huge storms, of course, the floodwaters may overtop the dune, but this has so far eliminated probably 90% of the flooding that the residents were previously experiencing. It's definitely significantly enhanced both the shoreline and the intertidal habitat there, as well as the reef habitat offshore. And we are now using this as an important component of our living shoreline demonstration projects. We've taken decision makers and public tours and so forth out to this site. And its success has really done a lot for promoting the use of living shorelines in the inland bays. So I just want to finish here just by thanking all of the partners who helped with this. This was a multi-year project. It took a lot of money and a lot of cooperation to get this done, but we had a great partnership that we're continuing to mine for future projects in Dewey Beach. We're currently looking at another public park there, Sunset Park, and some adjacent public and private shoreline areas to do additional integrated living shoreline and stormwater projects. So I think that is it. I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, well done. Emily, how are we for time for any discussion from the group?
So I believe we do still have about 15 minutes if we want to open it up to any questions. I'm not seeing anything new in the Q&A box right now, so folks feel free to add those to the Q&A box, and we can also, if anyone wants to make any questions live, we can, if you want to use the raise hand feature, we can open up the mic as well.
While waiting, I just want to reiterate, hopefully folks appreciated a session that went from such comprehensive planning like a CCMP into focused planning towards resources and groups, several of which overlapped, to ultimately resulting in funding a variety of sources because people saw all the effort and the partners that were involved trying to reach this common goal that then resulted in some really great projects over the last few years that have been able to be implemented, not just put on the shelf, but actually in the ground. And I give the partnership a lot of credit for the amount of time it took to get to this point and the effort and the focus and the stick-to-itiveness to get there, and some really great projects. So I see something came up, Emily.
Yes, we have one that just came in. Marianne, do you think having a plan in place made your projects more competitive for funding?
Absolutely, yeah. We've been very successful in competing for grant support on these projects, particularly with some of the state and local grants. We're trying to go for some bigger grants now, some of the NIFLIP and NOAA grants to achieve some of the bigger projects. We have basically peeled off the low-hanging fruit already on this. That we did one of the smallest fire retention areas, and we did the Shoreline project, which we had grant funding from DelDOT and some other opportunities that helped facilitate it. One of the challenges now for the town and for the center is finding funding to implement the 38 remaining BMPs that are in that stormwater master plan. And many of them are very expensive. So we're trying to work with the town right now to figure out a way for them to develop a funding strategy so that they can have in place a 10-year, a 20-year plan for how they're going to implement that. What are the high priority ones? What do they want to put their money into? And how are we going to be successful in securing additional funding?
Marianne, if I could just build on that, would you say that the success on the planning went beyond just a CCMP? The fact that you went to these more detailed focus plans, resources, detailed partners for each resource really affected, and you got good input back from funding agents that you went to that kind of detail?
Yeah, absolutely. The CCMP just establishes the goals and the metrics, but it doesn't tell us how to achieve that.
Right.
So, you know, it may take 20, 50 different projects to achieve a particular metric that's in the CCMP, and there's no clear pathway to that in the CCMP. So these plans have just been key. We've been refining our planning process, and it definitely has made us much more hugely successful in securing funding because we've got it all laid out. We have everything that the grantors are asking for already in that plan. And it's a very time efficient process to put those proposals together.
Do you have another one, Emily?
Yes, I think we do have a question actually from Leah at PDE. So go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody else that's in the audience can see my hand raised. We do encourage the verbal ask. But Marianne, I'm curious if you had ever considered doing any type of recruitment or monitoring study for settlement on your oyster shell bags that you put out.
Yeah, well, we are looking at that as part of the monitoring of the Living Shoreline project. So we have a monitoring plan for each project, and we will be taking a look at them at least annually. And for those that include oyster shell, we will be looking for recruitment. And this is an important data set to have for our shellfish enhancement plan too, because we're trying to figure out, okay, where is natural recruitment occurring most heavily in the inland bays? We don't really have that information right now. So those are areas that will probably be more successful in implementing oyster reefs in the future.
Cool.
Okay, great. I think we do have one more that just came in. Have your towns considered stormwater utility type mechanisms to fund projects?
Well, we are in Sussex County, which is
Where's Liz from?
probably the most tax averse area of the state. The town has, the town of Dewey Beach, which has been our most important partner, actually has been trying to brainstorm some creative ways to raise additional revenue through perhaps redirecting some of the funds that they normally collect for beach replenishment and redirecting that toward bayside projects, or possibly making some sort of ordinance change so that when businesses redevelop a parcel in the town, they have to either contribute to stormwater BMP implementation or pay a fee in lieu or something like that. I don't know that any progress has been made on that, but the parcels in the town of Dewey Beach are so small that they don't normally fall under normal stormwater regulations. So that would have to be an ordinance that was developed by the town itself.
Liz has asked some pretty good questions. If I could just build on that a little bit, Marianne, there's a lot of history in Delaware with stormwater utilities. There have been multiple efforts to go to a statewide utility, efforts to go to the 3 counties with their own, and municipalities. There's been a lot of history over the years with a lot of fits and starts. And the other related to that is the state of Delaware has been looking at alternative revenues that could serve for flooding as well as ecological restoration, and how to do that through some of their tourism taxation and some other revenues without putting new taxes and rediverting to make that happen. They're trying to look at some other creative ways there. As you can imagine, it's taken a lot of effort and a lot of politicking to try to make that work. Did you see any others? Hands raised or anything in the chat box, Emily?
I think that might be it, Jim, for the Q.
Yeah.
We do have a couple more minutes if folks have anything else, or we can, wrap up a couple minutes early.
Nothing wrong with that at the end of the day. I do want to thank Marianne and Doug. Great presentations, and they're very engaging. They didn't just present, but they were awesome presentations. And thanks to Leah and Emily for keeping this thing moving smoothly. No glitches, and it's always a joy working with you two. So with that, then, you think we should shut down then, Leah and Emily?
Yeah. If nobody has any more questions, we can hang back for a few more minutes in case any extra ones come in. But okay. Folks are feel free to head out and prepare for. We do have one more session before the closing announcements that starts at 3:30. That's going to be our hot topic session, which is always pretty popular. So I encourage attendees to also try to hit that one if they can.
Thanks everybody for participating, and Marianne, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to present, and also for all the great questions. And
a nice full conference, Leah and Emily.
Thanks. Yeah, we're glad you enjoyed it. Yeah.
All right.
It's gone smoothly up until this point. So we hope that continues for the next 3 hours. We've done pretty well for ourselves so far, I want to say. So
it'll be good.
Yeah. I have to say, this is one of the best run conferences that I've been to over this past year.
Oh, great. Well, we're very happy to hear that, for sure. We worked pretty hard on it.
You guys always raise the bar very high for everybody. All right. I guess, Marianne, we'll just sit back just in case, but
yeah, there's still some folks in this session. I don't know if anybody has any other questions. This is probably the earliest that our sessions have ended. It's helpful that everybody stayed on time.
Yep. We'll just give it a couple minutes. Just let us know if everybody checks out, and then we'll.
Yeah, we still have 32 attendees in the room, so I don't know if anybody is meaning to hang on, but just in case.
How many folks were in the?
We got up to about 75.
Oh.
So, which is pretty impressive, given that it's like the last last concurrent session of the day. So.
Yeah. Well, when you have headliners like Marianne and with headliners like Marianne and Doug, you think the place would have been sold out.
Wouldn't have surprised me.
Yeah, I looked through the participant list very briefly, and not a whole lot of names that I recognize. So definitely people that haven't heard this in other places.
Yeah, yeah.
So Lee, are you guys getting a sense of the diversity, as long as we're just sitting here, the diversity of participants geographically?
So we've gotten a couple people from out west. We had somebody present yesterday during the climate forum that was from Los Alamos National Laboratory. We also had somebody from the Pacific Northwest somewhere. Other than that, we've had a lot of people that were pretty regional, but this is the highest number of registrations that we've ever had for any of our summits in the past. We had over 400 people register this year, which was really great. So I'm hoping that it paves the way for future summits as well, because I think that it kind of put us on the map, given that more so really, given that nobody had to travel to be here. So that was super helpful.
Yeah.
It's great for that participation. I know for me, the thing about the summit is just a chance to be in a room with all those great people.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
With folks, because it's usually every 2 years, and just there's just so much to that for this summit. That was just such a big part of this. But boy, getting that kind of crowd, that's great to reach out to even a bigger audience.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Maybe we can do a hybrid of in-person and virtual next time.
Yeah, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how we structure the one in 2023, just because we've completely reverted, like we've changed everything that we would have used in person to have it be a digital format for this year, obviously. So it'll be interesting to see if there is any type of, integrated virtual and in-person, pieces to it next year, or in 2 years, I mean.
Yeah,
So,
I think this year has definitely changed our work lives for good.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So.
Well, whether it's for better or good, but it has changed long term.
Yeah, yeah. There were some benefits, I would say.
Well, what do you think?
Yeah, I think
I
we're
do-
probably not getting any
Yeah.
additional
Yeah,
questions.
yeah. So I do appreciate you guys hanging on for a couple minutes. And thanks
Sure.
again, Marianne, for your participation, and to you, Jim, for volunteering as a moderator. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the summit.
You're very welcome. Thanks for making this so easy.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys have a good one.
All right. Enjoy the
See
day,
ya.
everybody.
See ya.